Yeah.
Welcome,
All right.
welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. Today, we're honored to have Arturo Dominguez. Arturo Dominguez is a journalist that covers race, extremism, misinformation, immigration, Cuba, and Latin America. He's a contributor to Latin Rebels, Unicorn Riot, Momentum, Gen, Afrosapiophile, among many other publications. He is the editor of Antagonist magazine and a leader of the group Writers and Editors of Color. Arturo Dominguez, thank you so kindly for affording me this interview. How are you doing today, my dear brother?
I'm good. I'm good, man. I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Well, I want to talk about the election. First of all, what's your top line on the election?
I think the top line for me has to be the Hillary Clinton strategy. I feel like Democrats in large part abandoned progressives, tried to court conservatives to try to make up those losses. Did a really poor job in Michigan for obvious reasons, with Gaza and the Arab vote there. A lot of the same issues, as to why Hillary Clinton lost, including Kamala Harris being a woman of color on top of that. So, the misogynoir was there, misogyny and racism, and the populism was lost. So, I think for me, the general shift to the right, for Democrats cost them big, and the mistake was trying to appeal to a base of voters that was never going to vote for them. And in that same sense, a lot of swing voters, like the Latino community, were swing voters, right? There's no Latino vote here. I think that's where they lost, a lot of uh, a lot of influence. There was a lot of things. Latinos did have to overlook a lot with Donald Trump, and I mean a lot. But in this country, we already know that the culture here will overlook sexual assaults and charges of rape and things like that. We saw it with, hate to bring up R. Kelly, but with R. Kelly, the general public pretty much already knew what R. Kelly was about. We knew what he was doing. We knew all these things that was pretty public, and no one batted an eye. Same thing with Diddy. Same thing with Trump. The machismo in this country is such that, we really look down on women as a society. People like me, like you, and most of the people I know try to uphold women, especially Black women. But it's just not that way as a culture in America. So I think that at the end of the day, the misogynoir played a huge role, and the Democrats' biggest mistake was trying to shift right and try to appeal to conservatives on a lot of key issues.
You know, we
Some
we've said a whole lot of times that if you have a choice between the real butter and some sort of synthetic butter, you're going to go for the real thing, right? And that's what
Right,
happened, right?
right, right. I think it was. I think I mentioned this when we did a radio show recently. I think it was Truman that said, if you give voters a choice between, and I'm paraphrasing, but if you give voters a choice between someone who's trying to be a Republican and a Republican, they're going to vote for the Republican every time.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's how I sum up this last election.
Now, the interesting thing is that let me tell you what I thought, and I was wrong in my thinking process as well. I was thinking that, as opposed to abandoning progressives, I was hoping that what was at play here is the run for a landslide. In other words, that the progressives were going to come out and vote, and you're just making yourself appealing so that the voter that you get now, because I thought Trump was so objectionable that what would have happened is that his voters would have stayed. When I said his voters, I'm not talking MAGA voters. I'm talking straight Republican voters would have just stayed home, and that she was hoping for them to come out and have a what he's calling a mandate, but in reality, she would have gotten a mandate. I was so wrong. I mean, I can say that in a lot of pieces. I just couldn't understand that people would vote for a Donald Trump. Now, both of us are Latinos. You are what you'd call yourself a white passing Latino. I'm a black Latino. Now, we know that within the Latino culture, there is something there with colorization. Why don't you tell us why you weren't very surprised with the vote with the switch that some Latinos made, specifically Latino men.
Well, for me, there was colorism played a huge role in the presidential election. As a Cuban and looking at the Cubans in Miami, that's absolutely what played the role. The fact that she's a woman and the fact that she's a black woman. A lot of what people don't understand is that when it comes to Cuba, Cuba now is a majority black country. After Castro took over, I call it the white flight, right? Everybody who left Cuba were the white Cubans. People tend to forget that Cuba was a slave colony. So the black population there is huge. The Cubans that left Cuba were the oppressors. Cuba was a segregated country at the time. Castro desegregated it. And for the most part, that's why they fled. It wasn't because, that they'll claim all these things about indoctrination and re-education camps and all these things. And that's partially true. The real reason why the white Cubans left is pretty obvious, right? They were all the white Cubans. All black Cubans stayed because they were granted access to things. So when I see the Cuban vote go from Joe Biden winning Miami-Dade and Broward counties, both Cuban strongholds, to the huge shift against Harris, I don't think a lot of those Cubans voted so much for Trump as they did against Harris. And I feel like that's a shame. On that same note, we have this issue across the Latino community in general. There's only 2.6 million Cubans in this country, right? So a lot of people give us grief every time Cubans vote Republican, but we're not really swinging any elections unless they're in Florida or something like that. But when you look at the numbers of Mexicans, for example, the number of Mexicans in this country, largest population of Latinos in this country, 30 whatever million. When I was looking at the voting data, something like 11 million of them voted for Trump. They can swing an election. Granted, most of them are in the Southwest, so they're spread out. Some are Chicago, spread out throughout the country. So it makes it harder to swing an election, but that colorism aspect problem was there. Puerto Ricans, same thing. Basically every Latino community, even Venezolanos, Salvadoreños, that colorism is there. When you look at how many Latinas voted for Harris compared to Latino men, then that's where you see the misogyny at play, right? Obviously, all those women didn't hold her being a woman against her. They didn't hold her being black against her. In the Latino community, you and I both know that there's a lot more compassion from the women than there are from men. Man, the machismo in our community is just through the roof. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And, as much as I try to fight that, I still, feel it sometimes as feeling the responsibility, being the breadwinner of, taking care of things, making sure things are done, all that stuff. But it's never to the point where I'm going to try to put my boot on my wife's neck or, be oppressive towards women or anything like that. So the misogyny for Harris played a huge role in our community, but it's when you look at how many Democrats lost across the board, House seats, Senate seats, you can't blame that on misogyny. And that's where I immediately started looking into that because I've been covering the White House shifting to the right since Biden took office on immigration, on trans rights, on policing, on, criminal justice reform, all these things. What I hadn't noticed was that Democrats in general were all shifting that way. The whole platform was shifting that way. I blame Jamie Harrison for a lot of it because he essentially ran the platform for all Democrats. And I don't know if it was his idea or the, $1 billion worth of analysts that they had sitting around.
You nailed
numbers.
it right there.
Right.
I mean, Jamie Harrison is just the face it's just the figurehead, the face that it's a
Right.
consultant class that's really running everything. As I saw a thing a few days ago where one of these guys said we have to rid ourselves of the consulting class because these are folks that don't know anything about you, me, or anybody in the middle class, the poor class. No, they simply don't know, but yet they run everything. Kamala got $1.2 billion, Arturo.
Yeah, no.
$1.2 billion. And, by the way, you're an independent journalist. You could use a few dollars. Did anybody make any effort to get you to educate your particular population to really go out there and vote their interests?
No, and my audience is largely progressives or leftists because there's another confusion here. Liberals need to stop claiming they're leftists because they're not.
Exactly.
Liberalism in this country is conservative like, it's middle,
Hmm.
center right at best. And anything left of that, we're all communists or whatever, socialists or whatever. And that's also an unfair assessment. And I think that this country thinks too much along the black and white, binary lines. You're either this or that.
Hmm.
So, at the stage we're in now, I wasn't particularly very excited about Kamala Harris, but me, if I say anything negative about Trump, for example, every Trump supporter out there is going to call me a liberal. I'm not a liberal,
Hmm.
I own guns, there's a lot of things that I have in common with conservatives, but there's a few things I should say I have in common with conservatives, but I'm more of a progressive slash socialist. And I don't align myself a lot with liberalism, because of, we're from Latin America. We hear about neoliberalism a lot, a lot. And, here we talk about neocons and neoconservatism and things, but, neoliberalism is a big issue. And when you're looking at it from the perspective of having family that lives in a country that's being oppressed by partisanship, there's no line between liberalism and conservatism. When you look at foreign policy in particular, they are the same.
Hmm.
When it comes to presidential elections, and I tried to explain this to a lot of my Palestinian friends, that when it comes to elections, foreign policy is never a real issue. It's the Both candidates are going to run on domestic policy type issues. The foreign policy is going to be the same.
Hmm.
You look at Cuba, you look at Palestine, you look at Venezuela, Mexico, all of our foreign policy transcends presidents. That presidents have, and I try to explain this because from my perspective in dealing with my contacts in the White House and the State Department and, DNI, things like that, you start to realize that presidents really do have little power over foreign policy. They dictate, for example, I got an email today about another substantial arms shipment to Ukraine. Those are every week.
Hmm.
Every week I get emails from the State Department about another substantial arms shipment to Ukraine. That's, to me, I get the whole point of the war, but it's a slap in the face when here I am, here you are, struggling to make ends meet. I'm a stroke survivor, 10 years now. In December will be 10 years. Have a lot of medical issues. I don't have health insurance. I struggle to get by, but we can afford to send billions to Ukraine, billions to Israel. We can spend, who knows what the dollar amount is to suppress and oppress Cuba, sanction Cuba, blockade Cuba. It's just ridiculous to me. And you watch them steal gold from Venezuela, you watch them
Hmm.
steal Maduro's plane, you watch them steal all these things, and it's never accounted for. They took Citgo, they gave it to Juan Guaido, he bankrupted it. Where did that money go? He lives in a mansion. Donald Trump tried to install him as president of Venezuela, failed, and now he lives like a king in Miami. And again, here I am, and millions of other disabled people, millions of impoverished people, 15 million children who don't know where their next meal is coming from. These are all slaps in the face. And despite everybody knowing that Donald Trump is going to carry the same policies into the next administration and make our situation even worse, you got to understand why people were mad with the Democrats, because a lot of things happened on their watch over the last 4 years. And I can see why a lot of people would want to overlook some things about Donald Trump.
Well, it
You know,
seemed
I
like what they really wanted to do is stick it to the in some
Right,
instances
right.
when we remove the misogyny and racist portion of it, because I don't want to give that a break. I think even if she were a guy, I still think she would have pulled it out, even if not as she should have. But I think it's important, and what you just said there, and that is that people people knew that Donald Trump was no good and still voted for him to stick it to the Democrats. Unfortunately, in life, whenever you make those kind of decisions, the only person that gets hurt is not it's neither Kamala nor Trump, because both of them are wealthy people. They'll be just fine. They'll get their egos bruised a bit, but they'll be just fine. And she got a couple of books out of it that's going to make her a whole lot of money uh, when it's all said and done. But Arturo, specifically on the Latino issue, this movement to the right, how permanent is it?
Um, I really hope it's not very permanent. However, listen to the pundits on cable news. Dana Bash recently on CNN about 2 or 3 days ago, when after the neo Nazis were
In
parading through
Ohio. Hmm.
Columbus, Ohio. She said something along the lines of, "It's hard to tell which side of the aisle these guys are coming from." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Did you just both sides neo Nazis?"
Oh
Like,
my God.
she did the opposite of what Trump did. He said there's good people on both sides. She just said both sides are neo Nazis. And that's driven by, people who are protesting against the genocide.
Mhm.
They're currently trying to equate anybody who protests against genocide as Hamas supporters, as anti Semitic. If you question Zionism, that's anti Semitism. And then in that, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the pundits on, that do their own analysis of the election. And they're talking about we should dump identity politics,
Oh no.
dump the trans issue, dump this, dump that. And the problem that I have with all that is, one, you can't, not if you want to be any different, because Trump uses identity politics. He just uses white identity
Hmm.
politics. Um, but they're using language from the far right. They're using far right thought. When you hear them say something like, we need to, stop pushing to allow boys and girls sports,
Hmm.
there are no boys and girls sports. And the trans issue is so minuscule when you consider the size of the population of trans people in this country. I'm a father to a trans adult. I raised a trans kid. To me, it's a personal issue.
Hmm.
And when I hear these pundits talk like that, I take it personally because they're putting my child at risk.
Hmm.
You know, to say we should abandon them is you're abandoning a core of your base, because you're not just abandoning trans people, you're abandoning their families, their supporters, their friends. A huge portion of the LGBTQ community are supporters of trans rights. And one of the biggest things that struck me about Harris and the shift to the right with Democrats in general, because Colin Allred did this too. They asked Harris if gender affirming care should be a right for trans people, and her response wasn't trans rights or human rights, which would have been the response in 2020
Exactly.
under Biden, right? She said, "We're going to follow the law."
Yeah.
I said this on the radio show a couple weeks ago. What law are you talking about? Because, then she goes on to, "We're going to do what Donald Trump did." That's the problem.
Hmm.
Stop trying to say, "I'm going to do exactly what Donald Trump did, but I'm not threatening democracy." That's not enough to win, because, one, most of the country doesn't believe that Donald Trump was an actual threat to democracy. They think the guardrails in place are going to protect it. And for the most part, I sort of feel the same way. I don't know that there's nothing solid out there that shows me that he can derail democracy, that he can not, give up once his term is over. He's going to have to walk away if he doesn't die in office, right? Because I
Hmm.
mean, he's the oldest guy ever. So there's a lot of issues there. And then, when Ted Cruz, he was getting his butt kicked here in Texas, running the ads on immigration against Colin Allred. People were like, "Oh, but Ted, you didn't vote for the bipartisan border bill." He was polling very badly, so he dropped all the immigration ads, jumped over to the trans issue,
And it
and
took off. Yeah.
right, and he made it into this. Colin Allred supports boys playing in girls' sports, and Colin Allred is a conservative Democrat.
Yeah.
He supports the
The
bipartisan border
94,
bill.
98 bill
Right, right.
that called terror. I mean, supposedly give the president free rein to call an organization terrorist and supporting terrorists and to remove their 501(c)(3) classification.
Right,
Sad. Yeah.
right. And he made the mistake of trying to appeal to the Christian nationalists and, Christian conservatives. And like I don't know, where he doesn't see the racism in Christian nationalism, but Christian nationalism is the modern day Klan,
Yeah, it
KKK.
is.
I mean, that, that's what the Klan is and was and always has been, is Christian nationalism. And when he came out to try to defend himself against the accusations from Ted Cruz, they should have never taken the bait, is
Mm-hmm.
what it was. Because as soon as they take the bait, they validate all these far
Mm-hmm.
right talking points that come from the Proud Boys and neo Nazis. And, you have to, what they fail to realize is that Donald Trump isn't a conservative. He's not a Republican. MAGA supporters are not Republicans. They are far right.
Mm-hmm.
And to say racism didn't play a role in his election would be, hate to say it, ignorant at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You'd
Mm-hmm.
have to be blind to not see it, because when my neighbor across the street put a Trump van sign out in his yard, I'm side eyeing him from now on. I'm not waving at him anymore. I'm not interested, because a guy like that not only put my family at risk, but the Trump Vance sign to me is essentially a burning cross,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't abide that whatsoever. So if hopefully nothing ever happens, but if it does, we're ready for it. And I hate that we have to be like that. I hate that I have to be like that. Like I said, I'm a gun owner. Everybody in my house are shooters. We all go to the gun range. We've all been to the gun range. We're ready to defend ourselves if we need to. We just hope we never have to. And I hope to never be put in that position, because even being a stroke survivor, if somebody thinks that I won't throw hands, they are seriously mistaken. You
Ellos
know,
no saben cómo son los cubanos.
right. If somebody thinks I won't, I will. So, yeah, it's pretty unfortunate that, even neighbors who are supposed to be looking after each other felt the need to rub it in people's
Mm-hmm.
faces.
Yeah.
And, what I find interesting is that we have a new neighbor that lives next door to him. They're Latinos. On the other side of him is a black family. Two houses down are other new neighbors. They're Latinos too. They're Mexicans. And in my mind, I feel like he put that sign out there because he's surrounded by non-white people
Imagine that.
across the
Exactly.
street, on either side, two houses
Uh-huh.
down. You know what I mean? So our neighborhood is very diverse. We have an Indian family that lives down the road. The grandfather comes in from India every once in a while. He stops by, hangs out in our yard. He talks to us every time he's in town, and it's really cool. But the neighbor with the Trump van sign, he's not like that. People don't
Mm-hmm.
come by, stop by, and hang out and visit him, because everybody's looking at him, sideways, because for obvious
Exactly.
reasons, for obvious.
Well, he knows what he did, but
I think
Arturo,
so.
Arturo, let me ask you. So, given to the final question now, where do we go from here?
Well, I think what Democrats need to do is they need to listen to people like us. Not these people that are charging them $100 million a month to run analytics and things like that. If you're looking at it from my perspective, a former DHS and FEMA contractor, right? I've been in the trades my whole life. I know what a job site looks and sounds like. When you're out there with a bunch of stonemasons, bricklayers, framers, roofers, whatever, you have to be able to reach those people, that
Mm-hmm.
particular segment of the working class, not just auto workers, not just unions. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to reach the everyday average Joe. And the issue on these kind of job sites is they are huge echo chambers.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't there I was always one who would clap back on racism, type of bigotry type stuff, but there aren't many people like me out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes an echo chamber. Everybody starts believing whatever. So, I can already see how it went when the whole discussion about Harris's identity went, whether she's Indian, whether she's black, never claimed
Mm-hmm.
to be black. You know what I'm saying? I can see how that turned into a whole thing. And that in itself sows distrust.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of other things that I think were focused on that didn't help were, people saying Kamala, and people.
Yeah.
Look,
See.
we are Latinos, right? My father is not going to say Kamala. He's going to say Kamala, because
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't speak English. He
Right.
says it how he says it. People get my name wrong all the time, and I'm
Now
not
think about
stand
mine.
right, right. And I'm not standing there when a white person calls me Arturio. I might correct them once, but if they continue, it's whatever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They
Yeah.
just can't say it, whatever. Um, it shouldn't have been that nitpicky of a thing.
Exactly.
I think that turned a lot of people away. And then when they asked Kamala Harris about gun control, I own a Glock. You come in my house, you're getting shot. That was pandering to the
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
the right conservatives, gun owners saw that. As a gun owner, I saw that. She says, I own a Glock, you come in my house, you're getting shot. That's not something that spoke to me as a gun owner.
Hmm.
I thought it was pandering. Everybody I know, my brothers who both are Trumpers, saw it as pandering. And a lot of the whole shift to the right, came across as pandering. I think that the message should have stayed with what worked for Biden, and that was a more progressive message. Granted, Biden said he would protect asylum because asylum's a human right, and then he reneged on that and put restrictions on asylum. He actually there's another restriction coming down from the Biden White House, and here we are in a lame duck segment of his presidency, and there's no reason for it.
Hmm.
Numbers at the border are like ridiculously low, and there's no reason to restrict asylum other than to make Donald Trump's job easier. That's one less thing he's going to have to do. So I don't understand why. And I honestly, the whole Biden presidency, I blamed his cabinet. I blamed his staff, the people around him, not the lower people, because there are some good
Hmm.
people that I have contact with in the Biden White House. And they actively tried to make a difference while also trying to protect their jobs. Some people, that's all they got.
Hmm.
They lose that job, they're in my boat. They'll be
Hmm.
homeless in a week. So, I have a lot of respect for a lot of people in the press office and some of the staffers that work under some of Biden's appointees. But I think guys like Blinken, and some of the other war hawks he's got in the cabinet, they just, I think they drove a lot of policy, and they were in his ear in a way that they were easily able to convince him to do things in Palestine that really worked against him. That, with policing, giving cops $35 billion during COVID, right after, he promised that there would be accountability. He didn't put any accountability measures in with that money. If you're going to give them money like that, there has to be some sort of requirement.
Hmm.
He gave Customs and Border Protection another close to $10 billion and doubled their budget. No accountability measures despite the history of violent crime from Border Patrol agents. And you give them that kind of money and don't hold them accountable, then that violent crime is just going to get worse. The
Exactly.
sexual assaults are going to continue to grow, and the inhumanity is just going to continue to get worse. And we see that with, a lot of these open air camps that are already existing that hold families at the
Hmm.
border, because since there's so many restrictions on putting families into a detention center, they just put them in an open air cage and force them to sit there for a few days until they figure out if that family can be let in the country or not. And that's the solution for not breaking up families across the border. And it's a terrible one. So, when you're focused on an enforcement only policy and a restrictionist policy, that just makes room for more inhumanity and doesn't solve any problems, doesn't solve any issues with the shortage of judges or with all the problems in the immigration system, like the green card backlog, which, there are 1.3 million Indians on.
Hmm.
And based on the numbers we're seeing today, estimates are showing that by the time they'll qualify for a green card, they'll already be dead.
Be dead.
So
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. And no one in the Biden White House, no one in any White House since it became a problem has tried to solve that. And now we're at a point where 1.8 million people are there. 1.3 million of those are Indian tech workers
Right.
and hospital doctors and things like that. And that's a scary situation for them. If they lose their job, they get deported. Yeah.
Well, Arturo, we have a lot. We have a whole lot that we need to get accomplished, and it's great having writers like yourself, journalists like yourself, covering it, and having an audience that we can. I don't like to say educated sound a bit condescending, but at least we're doing something that the mainstream media isn't doing. So I want to thank you for what you do, and we have to do this more often.
Hey, absolutely, man. And I want to thank you for what you do. I try to listen to your show as much as possible. And when I get up early in the mornings, and my grandkids have been here for like the last 2 weeks, so wake them up, wake my son up, get them dressed, all this stuff so they can go to daycare. Hey, feed
It's
the
a lot.
dogs. Yeah, feed the dogs, take them out, all this stuff. It's chaos. It's chaos
Well,
till about
look,
nine in the morning. So
you,
yeah,
you you you're doing a lot. I thank you for the interview, my brother, and we'll do this again soon. All right.
absolutely, man. Thank you.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.